Hello and welcome. I'm Makayla, and this is To Be Known. You might have asked yourself this question before. Why do I feel numb? Today, I hope to help you find an answer as to why you might be feeling this way, or maybe you felt this way in the past. Today, we are going to be talking all about emotional numbness, stress, trauma, disconnection, and emotional compartmentalization, and what all of these things have to do with one another. I hope to give you some insight today and give you some advice on how you can cope with emotional numbness in your own life. I just want to say first off that if you are dealing with emotional numbness, it is okay for you to be feeling this way. Sometimes when life gets very heavy and when we feel overwhelmed, emotional numbness is a way that we are just trying to cope with the things that might be bringing us pain. So I just want to say it's okay if you are feeling this way or if you have felt this way in the past. It is a normal and natural way for you to be coping with whatever burdens have been going on in your life. Emotional numbness happens when you are feeling disconnected from your emotions, or maybe you just aren't able to feel them fully, no matter what emotion it might be, whether it be joy, sadness, anger. There's just sort of a flat effect on your emotions. Emotional numbness is a defense mechanism, a coping mechanism, and this is your brain, your mind, just trying to help you cope and deal and protect yourself from these emotions that might be overwhelming you. From my own understanding, I believe that there is a scale to emotional numbness, just like there is a scale to pretty much anything. On one side of emotional numbness, you have something more mild, more temporary, or situational, whereas on the other side of emotional numbness, it's a lot more severe and maybe long-lasting or reoccurring throughout your life. Emotional numbness is honestly something that I believe is very difficult to deal with because you just don't feel quite right. You know that you should, air quotes, be feeling something, but you just can't. You can't get yourself to feel happy or to feel sad or to get angry. There's just sort of this fog around you and within you. Personally, I have dealt with more so phases of emotional numbness where they were more mild to moderate and not the more severe, long-lasting versions. But even with those phases of my life where I have dealt with emotional numbness, I had to go to therapy in order to break down and understand exactly what was going on in my life, what I was trying to feel, what I was trying to protect myself from. And going to therapy is something that really benefited me when trying to cope with emotional numbness. Before we get into today, I do just want to know that if you are currently dealing with emotional numbness and you are wanting to learn how to cope with it, if you are in a position where you are able to afford therapy or counseling, please go, because that is going to be the best way for you to face emotional numbness right in the face and really be able to learn and cope with how to deal with it in the most effective way for you. Just saying. I just want to note that before we get into today, because this episode is really just going to be a mini version of everything that I've learned in regards to emotional numbness and my own experience in therapy and what I have learned in school. And it's just really going to be a mini version, and I hope that what I say today could give you some information and knowledge of what it is that you might be going through and how you can cope with it. But it's not the end all be all. This is just a little info sesh to sort of help you if you are looking for ways to understand and cope with the pain of emotional numbness. Some of the causes of emotional numbness are usually prolonged stress, anxiety, depression, trauma, or burnout. And also some psychological conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder, borderline personality disorder, depersonalization, derealization disorder, bipolar disorder, or substance abuse. Those can also be psychological conditions that can contribute to emotional numbness as well. And today I specifically am going to be talking through the effects that stress and trauma can have on emotional numbness. So maybe you are currently in a position where you are experiencing chronic, prolonged stress, and it has really led you to feel this sort of weight of emotional numbness. Or maybe you have gone through something traumatic that has led you to also feeling emotional numbness. These are some of the things that I personally am going to be focusing on today. But, there's other resources out there that you could also look to if you're dealing with some of those other reasons why you might be feeling emotionally numb. But please continue to listen, because I promise there might be some tidbits of information that could help you better understand where your emotional numbness might be coming from, as well as some tips at the end to help you cope with emotional numbness. So please stay tuned. I promise there might be something here for you. Some other things to consider when talking about emotional numbness is that in childhood, you might have learned that it can keep you safe. This idea of emotional numbness, if you were able to detach from your emotions at a young age, it might have protected you in your childhood. This might have been a mechanism that you learned early on in life. You might have received messages that your emotions weren't worth expressing or feeling, so maybe it led to you turning off your emotions entirely. Or maybe you've experienced a traumatic event where emotional numbness is the easiest way for you to cope with the fallout of whatever trauma you have experienced, because trauma is a very overwhelming sensation. Trauma completely transforms your life that sometimes you're just kind of left numb afterwards. Whatever it is, whatever the cause, whatever the reason, emotional numbness is very normal to experience and to feel. There's just a lot of reasons why you might be experiencing it in your own life. For me, emotional numbness has sort of come in and out of my life where when I have gone through something traumatic, I really didn't know how to cope with my emotions immediately. And it sort of led me to emotionally compartmentalizing them and rationalizing them, but not really allowing myself to fully feel my emotions. Feelings of anger or sadness or fear, I sort of shoved them all down and made myself very numb. The effects of the trauma that I experienced in my life had led me to feel so overwhelmed that I just didn't know how to deal with it sometimes for months or for years afterwards. I just sort of shut off and just floated about my days and floated about my life and just didn't really feel any highs or lows, but rather just kind of was there. When I have sort of dealt with this emotional numbness, I felt very out of my body and out of my life and out of myself. I just didn't feel connected to who I was and what I was doing. I knew what I should be feeling, air quotes, should be feeling, because I'm an expert at rationalizing my emotions. But for me, I rationalized my emotions to the point at which I wouldn't even feel them, because I would say, you know what, I'm supposed to feel this way. I should feel this way. Do I actually feel this way? No. And I would just compartmentalize myself so much to the point that it made me emotionally numb, because I was just trying to cope with a bunch of things at once. And for me, emotional compartmentalization and emotional numbness personally went really hand in hand, because I was just trying to make myself not fall apart. I was just trying to keep going in my life and keep pushing through, because life doesn't stop after a traumatic event. And you have to learn how to cope. That for me, the easiest way for me to cope with whatever traumas that have occurred in my life was by kind of just shutting off my emotions and just riding through life and doing what I had to do, because I still had to get things done. I was in college, I was working, I had a social life that I didn't want to give up entirely. But for me, internally, inside, I just kind of felt numb. When I was going through phases of emotional numbness, I didn't seek out therapy because I just really didn't want to think or really dive into exactly what was going on, because it just all felt so overwhelming that if I turned it on, if I started talking about it, then it would just be too much. And I sort of waited until I was okay to talk about things before I went into therapy, and then went back and looked at those phases of my life where I did feel emotionally numb. So I'm just saying, I know I said earlier, if you are dealing with it right now, go to therapy, but I also understand, because in my own experience, when I was going through this phase of emotional numbness, I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to talk about things because it just felt like too much. And right now, if things are feeling like too much and you're just wanting to learn about emotional numbness, here you are. Congratulations for clicking on the video and giving yourself the time and space to learn more, because knowledge is power, and the more knowledge that you have about emotional numbness and the things that go along with it, the better you will be able to understand yourself, and the better you'll be able to cope with things. So I'm just saying, shout out to you. I definitely didn't look at videos when I was going through this phase of my life, but be proud of yourself for clicking on this video today if you are going through one of these phases, or if you're dealing with it chronically. I'm so deeply sorry, and I hope that today I could give you a little bit of perspective on what it means and how you can cope with it. As you become more aware of emotional numbness, it's really important that you remember that this is just a way that you are protecting yourself from getting really overwhelmed. Think of this numbness as a barrier around you. It's trying to protect you, and it might be doing a good job at it, but it also might not be letting good things come into your life. It might be keeping you trapped in the bad that you might have experienced in the past. But it's just a defense coping mechanism. It's a barrier, and it's trying its hardest. It's doing its best just to keep you from being overwhelmed. Speaking of getting overwhelmed, stress is one of the biggest reasons why I think emotional numbness occurs. And this is just my opinion, because it's just been my experience with it when I've been in periods of my life where I have been extremely overwhelmed and stressed. This emotional numbness kicks right in. Stress happens when we perceive threats or challenges in our lives. And stress, it could either be acute or short term, or it could be chronic, long term. Acute and chronic stress are very different. And chronic stress has a lot to do with this feeling of emotional numbness, because if you are in a prolonged state of stress, it takes a lot of toll on your body, your mind, your emotional state. Some of the causes of stress, which are also known as stressors, are just the causes of stress in our life, can be personal relationships, personal issues, or work-related stress. It doesn't matter what it is. There's a lot of things in our life that can give us stress. Chronic stress in our life leads to a slew of issues, whether it be physical, mental, or emotional. Chronic stress can definitely affect your emotional state and lead to emotional numbness. Because let's say you are experiencing stress in every single sphere of your life: family, relationships, personal, work, and you are just overloaded all the time. And it doesn't even matter if it's all of these areas of your life, but if it's just one area of your life, just having burnout in your life. And burnout is one of those causes for emotional numbness that I said earlier. So when you think of stress as a trigger or an invader of this fortress that you have built around yourself. Think of it as something that signals to your mental, physical, emotional systems that something is wrong and that you need to put your guard up. If the coping mechanism that you have developed or just naturally have is to emotionally shut down and to emotionally become numb, of course, stress is going to signal that coping mechanism to come up and to protect you from whatever it is that might be overwhelming or threatening or challenging. Because that is what this numbness is. It's just a coping mechanism that our brain has learned at some point in time helps protect us. And the brain is so interesting in the way that it just sort of decides what's the best thing for us. And sometimes our coping mechanisms are great and they're healthy and they're awesome. And other times they might not be serving us in the best way, but it's just how we have learned to cope. When we're thinking of stress and emotional numbness, it really is just this trigger and barrier reaction. Stress triggers us to sort of put up this barrier, this emotional numbness, in order to protect ourselves. When emotional numbness happens, it might not lead you to respond to these emotional triggers in a healthy way. Emotional numbness, it can sort of let us ignore the things that are going on underneath, whether it be those feelings of anger or sadness or even joy. Like, it doesn't matter what emotion it is, it just sort of lets us forget about them. With that being said, a lack of an emotional response might make it a lot more difficult for us to sort of figure out what the root cause of the stress we're feeling is, because we've detached ourselves from our emotions. We're numb to them, that we might not really realize like what's going on and why we might be feeling stressed out, because we might be so detached or so numb to our emotions. You might just not really understand what is really going on deep down within you. What this does is it creates a cycle of feeling detached and feeling overwhelmed. This cycle of stress and numbness, it can be a very easy cycle to get into and a very difficult cycle to get out of, because when life gets you overwhelmed, then you detach from your emotions, you sort of go numb and you forget about them, and you just sort of go through life until it becomes overwhelming again. And it sort of leads you into this spiral that might not leave you feeling good. So that's the first sort of section of what we're going to be talking about today. This connection between emotional numbness and stress, and how it can sort of leave us feeling worse over time. With that being said, now it is time to move on to the way that trauma and emotional numbness can also relate to one another. And if you are someone who has gone through a traumatic event recently, or that you have in the past, and it's really difficult to address this event that has occurred in your life, whether it was a single event such as an assault or something more ongoing like abuse, trauma can really trigger this emotional numbness. Because when we experience something traumatic, it is something that deeply disturbs us in a way where our world is completely changed. Trauma can leave us in a place of just pure distress and feeling so overwhelmed, because it really just gets to the core of who you are as a person and makes your entire worldview switch, or your view of yourself switch, or just anything. It just completely can alter the course of your life. When you have gone through something that is traumatic, the event, whether it is a singular event or ongoing, can really overwhelm your ability to cope with whatever it is that you have gone through. It just can lead you in such a state of horror or distress or just fear that those feelings as a human being are just so overwhelming that no wonder it is a coping mechanism that you just turn the emotions off in order to deal with the trauma that you might have experienced. Feeling numb after a traumatic event, whatever it is that you might have gone through, emotional numbness is very, very, very common. And I just want to normalize that right now. If you have gone through something traumatic, first off, I am so sorry. And I am so honored that you are watching this video today and that you are listening to what I have to say about emotional numbness. But when it comes to trauma and emotional numbness, these things go so hand in hand that I don't want you to feel down and out about yourself if this is something that you are trying to deal with right now. If this is something that has been chronic for you, this state of emotional numbness, I am so sorry, and I hope that what I say today can help you deal with the difficulties of numbness. As I said earlier, emotional numbness acts as this sort of barrier to protect us from the world. So when we are feeling this state of emotional numbness, it is just your mind's way of trying to cope with the effects of whatever the trauma is. And if you need time before you go back to the trauma and address it and feel it, that's okay. That is okay. Trauma is something that if you have gone through it, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where it just completely disrupts everything in your life. It disrupts your ability to process your emotions, your thinkings, your behaviors, who you are as a person, and what you're trying to deal with. All of these things can be so difficult when you have gone through trauma. You have just been through something that was so overwhelming, and your mind, your body is just trying to cope with the fallout of whatever it is that you have experienced. Your mind is just doing the best that it can with the flood of emotions that it might be feeling, or it might just be trying to protect you from those emotions that either we feel too much or we don't feel anything at all. For me, in my experience, I really went through like these two sides where either I was absolutely flooded with emotions and I was so overwhelmed with them that I just didn't know what to do, or I had this other side where I just did not feel anything at all. It's so hard to feel connected to your life before the trauma or the world around you or people in your life after you have experienced something traumatic, because your life isn't the same anymore. And this disconnection between the world around you and yourself is just so common to experience after trauma, that if you have gone through this, you understand. And if you're currently going through it, I am so sorry, because it's just a really isolating feeling. I really want you to feel connected to yourself and your emotions and your life again. But trauma makes it hard. Trauma makes that very, very hard. And this disconnection from ourselves can come out as emotional numbness, which makes sense. When you think about this disconnection from the self, of course you're going to feel emotionally numb if you've gone through something really hard, and of course this emotional numbness might come out. When we are feeling this emotional disconnection, we're having trouble expressing or feeling our own emotions, being attached to our own emotions, or even like understanding or being empathetic towards other people's emotions. It's like this huge emotional disconnect where we're just really out of body when it comes to emotions. And there's a lot of overlap between emotional disconnection and emotional numbness. So I just sort of want to clarify that, because those are two very different things in my personal opinion. Emotional disconnection is like literally having like an out of body experience, I guess, and emotional numbness is just sort of like, you know, it's there, but you're like not really feeling it sort of thing. At least it's how I personally define those two things. Before we close out, I just want to talk about emotional compartmentalization. This, in my opinion, does have to do with numbness, this emotional numbness that we're talking about, because you can experience emotional numbness from emotional compartmentalization, because these are two different ways of coping with your emotions. However, emotional compartmentalization is seen as more positive because you are allowing yourself to feel your emotions in emotional compartmentalization most of the time. I'm whispering most of the time, but also at the same time, you can emotionally compartmentalize a little bit too much. And I have personally done this in my life. So I just want to talk about it today because for me, emotional compartmentalization has also led to numbness in my life. And I just want to touch on that before we close out today. So if you aren't familiar with emotional compartmentalization, it's basically the either conscious or unconscious, where you're either aware, you're not aware of you storing and isolating emotions that you might be feeling in different parts of your psyche or your mind. And when we emotionally compartmentalize, there are a lot of benefits to doing this, because when we emotionally compartmentalize, some of the positives that we might experience are we don't let our emotions overlap in different areas of our life. The stress or emotions that you feel about work probably won't affect your friends if you have a good sense of emotional compartmentalization, or it might not affect your family, or vice versa. Whatever these things are, you're able to keep your emotions in these different spheres of your life very confined to those things. Another thing is that it sort of is a way that you have cognitive control. And cognitive means awareness. You have this control in your mind that you are able to put your emotions to the side and get whatever it is that you need to get done. Like, you are able to be like, you know what, I'm having a sad day today, and I'm just going to forget about my sadness, and I'm just going to go to work, and I'm just going to do the best that I could do, and then I'm going to come back home, and then I'll feel sad. But today I'm going to go to work, I'm going to put a smile on my face, and when I come back, I'll let myself mope. That's another thing. That's, I guess, sort of a positive about emotional compartmentalization, is that you are able to really control when you turn your emotions on and when you turn your emotions off. With all of this being said, emotional compartmentalization, it is a coping tool, and it helps you manage stress in your life. So you're able to turn it on and you're able to turn it off. And it's also a good coping tool when you are thinking of trauma, because with this emotional compartmentalization, trauma isn't overbearing in your life. It's not like this monster that's like crowding over you, but rather it's just something that you will address sometimes and you won't address at other times, if that makes sense. It's not right there next to you. It's just kind of within you, and you might think about it and deal with it at times, but it's not constantly there. Your emotions aren't constantly there with emotional compartmentalization, but you do have that ability to turn them on and to turn them off. And that's sort of what emotional compartmentalization is and some of the positives of it. But at the same time, there are negatives to emotional compartmentalization. This turning on and off piece, it could lead you to ignoring your emotions if you are able to turn them on and off. Because if you're able to emotionally compartmentalize things in your life and you just, you shove it down, you shove all of the emotions down under there, that's also not good. And that can lead you to a state of emotional numbness, because you might emotionally compartmentalize so good that you feel no emotions, and that everything that bothers you, boom, it's just down. It's just down there. And you might not address the things in your life that you need to address if you are overly emotionally compartmentalizing. That's a negative of emotional compartmentalization, is that it might lead you to not process your emotions in a healthy way. You might completely ignore your emotions, and an over-reliance on emotional compartmentalization most definitely can lead to an emotional numbness, because if you just forget and ignore and you never address your emotions, over time, that is going to lead you to emotional numbness. Because when you are in a state where you are emotionally compartmentalizing to that point, to that extreme, then you're going to have a lot of unresolved issues that are lying down underneath all of the other things that you have going on in your life. And it doesn't feel good. I can promise you that much. So being mindful about how much you are emotionally compartmentalizing, and if you are someone who does that, I think is very important. There are definitely healthy and unhealthy ways to emotionally compartmentalize that. It's kind of just up to you on if you do turn on and off your emotions and deal with them in a healthy, effective way. That's great. That's a sign that you're emotionally compartmentalizing healthily. But if you're someone who you just shove it down all the way, that's not healthy, and it's really going to lead to a lot of unresolved issues and emotional numbness later down the line. Just saying. So we made it to the end of the episode where we're just going to talk about some ways that can help you deal with emotional numbness in a very healthy way. So first things first is developing emotional awareness. And I know it might sound easier said than done because we've been talking about emotional numbness and maybe you are in that state of your life right now. But what I mean by developing emotional awareness is the next time that you feel an emotion coming in, and maybe even talking about this right now is triggering an emotion within you. Recognize what it is, the emotion that you are feeling. Recognize it. See it for what it is, label it. Whether it is happiness, sadness, anger, label it. Evaluate what it is that made you feel this way and how it is making you feel. What is it that it's bringing up in your body, in your mind? How is this emotion affecting you? It's all about bringing awareness to your emotions and connecting with them again. Because this emotional numbness, it acts as a fog. Let's say that you are on this side over here and there is a bridge. And on the other side is your emotions. You are trying to walk across that bridge, trying to get to your emotions again. But this numbness acts as a fog where you can't even see where the bridge is. If you see where the emotion is on the other side and you try to clear that fog, that barrier between you and this emotion, you will get there. I promise you, the smoke will clear, the fog will clear, and you will be able to connect with your emotions again. You just have to be very intentional and practice over time. And with that being said, that's the second thing, is this idea of practicing mindfulness, this idea of really tapping in to your body and your surroundings and becoming connected with yourself and the world again. So amazing ways to practice mindfulness is meditation. You might love to hear it, you might hate to hear it, but it's a great way because if you sit in silence and you put your timer on for 1 minute, maybe your eyes are open, maybe your eyes are closed, and you just focus on your breathing, and maybe thoughts come up in your head or feelings come on in your head. If you focus on the silence, or maybe you listen to like a frequency or something, I don't know. If you focus on your body and connecting and being mindful within you and the world around you, that is another great way to connect, because this is what we're trying to do with all of the things that I'm about to say. It's this idea of reconnection, this idea of connection within yourself and your emotions. The next thing that I would advise you to do is to build supportive relationships. If you are in this state of emotional numbness right now, people in your life might be recognizing that you are in this state, or maybe they don't. I don't know how good you are at hiding it. I know that I personally have been very good at hiding it. But if you build supportive relationships with pre-existing relationships and you open up how you might be feeling this way, or you find new connections and you talk about your struggles with this, it is going to make you feel so much more connected to the world around you as well as yourself. Because when we share this emotional numbness that we might be feeling, it is a little scary to admit to people, because sometimes people understand, sometimes people don't understand. And when someone doesn't understand what numbness feels like, it just kind of makes you feel like trash, because it is so isolating that talking about it alone is scary enough. If you are able to build supportive relationships and build a community in your life, it can just make you feel so much more connected to yourself and to your emotions when you are able to talk to people in a very authentic and vulnerable way. Also, do things that you enjoy. If there is something that brought you joy in the past, whether it was when you were a child or when you were a teenager or a young adult, whatever it is, if there is something that you enjoy, go back and do that thing again. Go draw, go on a bike ride, go buy bubbles from Target or something. I don't know. Do things that bring you joy and make you feel good and happy. Because emotional numbness, it could really be hard to feel happy, and you deserve to do things that bring you joy. So just remember that there are things that have brought you happiness once, and you deserve to be able to go back and do those things again. And hopefully doing those things will bring back the spark within you. One of the most important things that I'm also going to share is creating a healthy routine. and practicing self-care. I'm kind of combining those things because when we feel emotionally numb, sometimes it can lead us to sort of letting go of taking care of ourselves and doing good things in our lives and having a routine. It can make us feel very bleh, and it can make life very bleh, and it can sort of steer us away from things that are good for us. So if you put an intention to create a healthy routine, whether it is you just try to brush your teeth every morning and every night, or creating a morning routine or creating a night routine, practicing self-care in your day and doing things to take care of yourself is one of the most successful feelings that you can have after, you're trying to pull yourself out of emotional numbness. With that being said, I think that setting realistic goals could be something that could really help you when you are dealing with emotional numbness, because if you set yourself up to do little things every day or every week or every month to just make yourself feel a little bit better, a little more joyful, and have a little bit of pride within yourself, it could really help you pull yourself out of numbness. And this is something that has personally really helped me in my own life, was setting realistic goals that when I checked it off of my list, it brought me a rush. It brought me a rush of joy and pride that I just really think that could be something helpful for you to do in your own life as well. And it doesn't have to be anything big. We're talking about realistic goals here. We're talking about, hey, maybe you set a realistic goal to go through the clothes in your closet and you do that, boom, great. That thing that was making you feel overwhelmed and stressed, that you were procrastinating and trying to numb yourself about, look, you did it. Congratulations. I don't know, little stuff like that can really just make you feel better about yourself, and accomplishing goals is just so healing in a way, at least in my personal experience. Something else that I think is really powerful when trying to cope with these feelings of numbness is by getting yourself educated on any of the topics that we talked about today. Today, it really just was a very mini version of talking about all of these things that contribute to emotional numbness, but going back, learning about stress, trauma, emotional numbness, dissociation, disconnection, emotional compartmentalization, making yourself educated on those things, having the knowledge of what those things are and how they affect you and how you could cope from them is something that can really help you overcome this feeling of numbness that you might be experiencing right now. Because when you are able to define and you are able to know exactly what it is that you are feeling, it makes it a lot easier for you to cope with, rather than just feeling so overwhelmed and just so helpless and hopeless when you are feeling emotionally numb. When you have that knowledge of all of the things that we talked about today, it can lead you to being able to help yourself, because when we are feeling emotionally numb, we might not be believing that we can help ourselves. When you have the knowledge about all of these things and what they are and how you can cope with them, it will help you exponentially. The last thing that I can advise you to do when coping with emotional numbness, I already talked about it at the very beginning of this episode, but seek professional help. If you are in a position financially or you are insured, please go reach out to a therapist, a psychiatrist, a counselor. It just really gives you the insight of who you are and how you operate and why you might be feeling this way, because emotional numbness is a protective mechanism. It is a defense mechanism, a coping mechanism that we have in our minds to protect us from whatever underlying thing is going on, whether it be stress, trauma, depression, any one of those causes that I mentioned earlier. There's a reason why you might be feeling this way. And talking to a professional is going to be the fastest way that you can really figure out exactly what's going on and figure out how to move forward in the best way for you. If you have made it to this point, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. I hope that I gave you some help. I gave you some tools. I hope that I gave you some insight on what emotional numbness is and some of the causes, and also some ways that you can help yourself when you are in this state, because it is not fun. And I know firsthand how it is not fun. I just want the best for you, and I hope that you also want the best for yourself. With that being said, it is time for the question of the week. What was one hard period of your life that you were able to pull yourself out of? Think about it, write about it, talk to someone who you love and trust about it. I will be here next week with another episode. I post every Tuesday to YouTube and Spotify. If you like this video, please give it a thumb up and subscribe. You can also listen on Spotify, follow on there. You could follow at Instagram at tobeknown.co, follow on TikTok at tobeknownco. The links are down below. With that being said, thank you for watching again. I hope I helped you today in some sort of way, whether it be big or small. I hope I gave you some more insight on why you might be feeling this way. Today was a little bit of a heavier topic. Go on a walk, go get some ice cream, do something that makes you feel good today. Stay true to you. Bye.